An 18-year-old Aboriginal man is more likely to end up in prison than go to university. The life expectancy of the average Indigenous Australian is 10 years lower than the rest of the population. Only 60% of Indigenous children finish high school, compared to 85% on average. Those are just some of the gaps that need closing, according to an annual government report. For tourists at cultural events like this one, Australia makes much of its Aboriginal heritage. But the reality for today's Indigenous Australians is that those with Aboriginal heritage lag way behind others. The so-called Closing the Gap targets were announced in 2008. The aim to end disadvantage within a generation. On Wednesday, Australia's Prime Minister gave an update on progress.
This report shows that while the results against the targets are mixed, there have been significant gains. While it's important to celebrate the successes, there's much work to be done to meet the targets. And today I want to reaffirm my government's commitment to closing the gap.
On track are infant mortality rates. They're down by more than half. And the aim to halve by 2020 the gap between the proportion of Indigenous children who finish high school and the average looks achievable. This drop-in centre in Sydney provides after-school tutoring and computer use for Aboriginal children. It's the sort of place helping to keep them in school. But in other areas being measured, gaps are not closing. The gulf in life expectancy between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people is as wide as ever. A far lower proportion of Indigenous people is in work, and an initial target to get 95% of 4-year-olds into preschool was missed. Some think the closing the gap ambitions are anyway too narrow.
The good side is it draws people's attention to what is an injustice, but it also is a risk that we think only about a handful rather than the complex set of challenges we face as a nation.
That means adapting institutions to Indigenous culture and building trust between Indigenous communities and those in authority, like health workers and the police. Andrew Thomas, Al Jazeera, Sydney.